Welcome to the Unseen Whispers, where the stories linger long after the night fades. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because some stories feel different in the dead of night. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The Root Witch's Grove. The fog rolled through the Appalachian Hills like a ghost, winding between trees and sweeping over the forest floor. The mountain range stood ancient and proud, its peaks shrouded in mist, its valleys deep and silent. To outsiders, it was a place of rugged beauty, where nature's wildness could be seen at its purest. But for those who called this land home, it was a place steeped in myth, where stories were whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. And none of these tales was as chilling as that of the Root Witch's Grove. In the small town of Tannenbrook, nestled at the foot of the mountains, the legend of the grove had been told for centuries. To the locals, it was a truth, one that existed far beyond the realm of speculation. The Root Witch was real. She was not merely a ghostly figure of legend, nor a creature that could be defeated with bravery or strength. No, she was something far more insidious, an ancient spirit tied to the land itself, her power embedded in the roots of the forest. Those who ventured too close to her domain were never the same. Some, like Daniel Carmichael, believed such stories were simply born from fear and ignorance, a way to keep outsiders away. He was wrong. Daniel Carmichael was a man who lived for adventure, for the thrill of the unknown. He'd built a reputation over the years for seeking out the myths and legends of the world, with the goal of exposing them for what they truly were. Nothing more than tall tales spun by the superstitious. He had debunked haunted houses, ghost towns, and cryptic disappearances. The more bizarre the myth, the more fascinated he became. And now, as he sat on the edge of the town's only bar, sipping a drink and listening to a group of old-timers recount yet another tale of the Root Witch, his skepticism grew. The Root Witch's Grove, an old man named Mr. Keegan was saying, his voice gravelly and worn, is a cursed place. People who've gone there haven't come back, or if they do, they ain't right. Ain't no good coming from that forest. Daniel couldn't help but chuckle. He had heard similar stories before, and he knew them for what they were, urban legends, morphed over time to strike fear into the hearts of those too afraid to confront the unknown. You really believe all that? Daniel asked, leaning forward, the amusement clear on his face. It's just a grove of trees. There's no witch. The old man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a deep shadow seemed to fall over him. You don't know the woods like we do, son. The witch ain't just a tale. She's the land itself, the trees, the roots. They've been here long before we ever set foot in these hills. The others around the table fell silent, their eyes shifting nervously. They'd all heard the stories, but none dared to speak them aloud in front of strangers. They had learned that some things were better left unsaid. Daniel stood up, finishing his drink. I'll be fine, he said with a grin, ignoring the anxious glances that passed between the townsfolk. I'll go to the grove, spend the night there. I'll get the proof that this is all just superstition. The townsfolk didn't respond. They knew better than to argue with someone like Daniel. He was determined, and when he set his mind on something, he wouldn't be swayed. The next morning, Daniel packed his gear, camera, flashlight, a couple of sandwiches, and his trusty pocket knife. He wasn't expecting anything supernatural. He was just out to prove that the Root Witch's Grove was no more dangerous than any other part of the wilderness. His friends, Ethan and Sarah, insisted on coming along, but Daniel persuaded them to stay behind. "You guys stay here," he said, "and I'll bring back the evidence you're all too scared to see." As he walked into the woods, the quiet of the forest seemed to wrap around him, and for a moment, a wave of unease brushed against him. The trees towered high above, their branches twisting in unnatural ways, the roots creeping across the forest floor like ancient fingers grasping at the earth. But Daniel was too focused on his mission to pay much attention. He pushed deeper into the woods, his boots crunching through the thick underbrush, his mind more occupied with the task at hand than the unsettling surroundings. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to close in on him. The sounds of the world outside the trees faded. No birds, no insects. Just the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The air grew heavier, and Daniel's steps began to feel slower, more deliberate, as though something was watching him. But he dismissed it as his imagination running wild. After about an hour of walking, Daniel found himself standing before a circle of trees unlike any he had seen before. The trunks were twisted and gnarled, their bark blackened as if scorched by some unseen fire. The roots snaked across the ground in intricate patterns, weaving in and out of the earth like veins or arteries. The area was eerily silent, the wind no longer stirring the branches. The circle of trees was completely still, as though holding its breath. Daniel set up his camera and began snapping pictures, feeling an odd mix of excitement and discomfort. This was it, the infamous Root Witch's Grove. He was about to expose it for the farce it was. As he stood in the center of the grove, the air seemed to grow cold, biting at his skin. He glanced up at the trees, feeling a shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong. The branches, which had once seemed so static, now appeared to twitch as if alive. But Daniel laughed it off. It was just the wind, he told himself. He made a fire to stave off the chill, preparing to settle in for the night. As the flames crackled and danced, he looked up at the twisted trees once more, scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. A strange feeling crept over him, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. Just as he began to settle, a low whispering voice echoed through the trees. "Leave." Daniel froze. It was impossible. There was no one else here. The voice sounded like it came from the roots themselves, deep and primal, as though the very earth was speaking. He stood up, looking around, his heart racing. He called out, but there was no answer. "Just my mind playing tricks," he muttered, trying to steady his breath. But as he returned to the fire, the feeling of being watched intensified. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees, but this time it sounded different, darker, more deliberate. The next few hours passed uneventfully, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He was about to pack up and leave when a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting between the trees, too quick to be human. He stood up, his heart pounding. "Hello?" He called out into the woods, but there was no reply. The darkness pressed in on him, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The fire flickered weakly against the oppressive chill that had settled over the grove. Daniel sat huddled close to the flames, the crackling sounds of burning wood the only noise breaking the silence that surrounded him. The wind howled through the trees, bending their twisted branches and making the whole forest seem alive and watching. The eerie feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach earlier had not subsided. If anything, it had grown stronger. He looked around the clearing, his eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. Every crack of the twigs, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of alarm through him, but he couldn't show fear. He had come here to debunk the myth, to prove that the Root Witch's Grove was just a superstitious story, an old wives' tale passed down through generations. He wouldn't let the rumors get the best of him. His fingers brushed against the worn leather of his backpack where he had packed his camera, his flashlight, and his journal. He'd been hoping to capture something, anything, that would reveal the truth behind this so-called cursed grove. Instead, the atmosphere had become so oppressive that every minute felt like an eternity. A soft crack echoed from the trees. Daniel stiffened. The sound came from his left, a little too deliberate to be the wind. He turned his head toward the sound, his heart hammering. There was nothing there. Another crack. This time it was closer. Daniel's breath hitched. He stood up slowly, his eyes searching the darkening forest. He scanned the area, his pulse quickening with every second. Nothing. There was nothing there, no sign of life. The wind was still, and the trees stood like sentinels, their twisted branches blocking the stars above. Maybe it was an animal, he reasoned. Maybe a deer or some small creature, just as it had been before. But this time, something about the sound didn't sit right. It was too methodical, too deliberate. He took a few steps forward, edging closer to the trees, but as soon as his foot hit the ground, the air around him seemed to thicken. It was as if the very atmosphere had grown heavier, pulling at his chest, making it harder to breathe. The temperature had dropped drastically. His breath came out in visible puffs, and his fingers tingled with the cold. Something was wrong. The sense of being watched was no longer subtle. It was overwhelming, pressing on him from all sides. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, curling around the base of the trees like dark fingers reaching toward him. "All right, that's enough," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unease. He glanced at his watch, almost midnight. It had been a long day and he was exhausted. He could leave in the morning. This would be just another pointless night in the woods to add to his list of adventures. No witch, no curse. But as he turned back to his camp, something moved in the corner of his vision. Something tall, something humanoid. A flash of movement, a figure, barely visible, moving between the trees, too fast for him to fully comprehend. His heart skipped a beat, his throat tightened. It wasn't human, it couldn't have been. The figure was gone before he could even react, disappearing into the forest without a sound. The tension in the air deepened, and Daniel felt a cold, creeping sensation crawl up his spine. He was no longer alone. He grabbed his flashlight, aiming the beam into the darkness. The forest swallowed the light almost instantly, the trees towering over him like silent giants. The beam of light shook in his hand, but he didn't know whether it was the cold or the growing dread gnawing at him. Then, in the distance, he heard it. A low guttural whisper coming from the very earth itself. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a voice. Leave! The word was drawn out, almost like a chant. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, ever so slightly, as if the roots themselves were alive. Who's there? Daniel called out, trying to sound more confident than he felt. But his voice cracked, betraying the rising fear inside him. The whisper came again, this time closer, sharper. Leave, or become part of the land. He spun around, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Nothing. There was no one there, no figure, no shape in the shadows. But the voice, it came from the trees themselves. In a blind panic, Daniel bolted toward the edge of the grove. The darkness seemed to press in on him, the trees bending and twisting in his peripheral vision, as though the forest was alive, moving, chasing him. The light from his flashlight flickered and went out, leaving him in pitch-black darkness. He cursed under his breath, fumbling with the flashlight, desperately trying to get it working again. His breath came in ragged gasps as his footsteps quickened. He had to get out. He couldn't stay here. He needed to leave before... Suddenly he tripped. His foot caught on something, sending him sprawling onto the cold, hard earth. Damn it, he muttered, pushing himself up. As he did, his hand brushed against something wet and sticky. His eyes went wide as he felt the ground beneath him. The earth was soaked, not with water, but something darker, something wrong. His flashlight flickered back to life for a brief second, casting a sickly yellow glow on the ground before going out again. But in that fleeting moment, Daniel saw something that froze his blood. There were teeth scattered on the ground, human teeth, large and sharp, glistening in the faint light. He recoiled, stumbling backward in terror, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His heart hammered in his chest as the realization sank in. These weren't just animal remains. These were human teeth. A low, eerie laugh echoed from behind him. The sound was chilling, unnatural, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The roots of the trees began to shift, creeping toward him as if alive, responding to some unseen force. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his pulse racing. He turned and ran, blindly, desperately through the trees, his footsteps heavy and fast, the sound of his own breathing loud in his ears. The trees seemed to close in around him, the shadows stretching, warping, distorting. And then, as if the forest itself had decided he wasn't going to escape, something large and unseen slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the air rushing from his lungs, his vision spinning. His flashlight fell from his hand, rolling out of reach. The trees seemed to bend over him, their branches reaching down like claws. He struggled to move, but the ground seemed to hold him in place, as if the earth itself had decided to claim him. The voice came again, cold and mocking. You've entered my domain, and now you will stay. The forest was silent, save for the low hum of the wind weaving its way through the gnarled trees. Daniel's head spun, his body locked in place as though the ground had fused to his skin. The weight of the earth pressed down on him, and the chill of the air seemed to seep into his very bones, freezing him in place. His eyes darted around frantically, but it was too dark. The trees, twisted and knotted like the roots of an ancient beast, loomed above him, their bark slick with something dark, something that shimmered with an unnatural luster, as if the very wood was alive. The shadows beneath them seemed to reach toward him, elongating and stretching like fingers. He could feel their presence, closer, too close. And then he heard it again, the voice. "Stay with me, Daniel. You belong here now. You are part of the land." The whisper was softer this time, as if the forest itself had breathed the words into his mind. His heart raced. He tried to scream, to call out for help, but no sound came. His mouth felt as though it were filled with earth, dry and cold. His body refused to move, paralyzed by the grip of the land. "Leave me alone," he finally managed to croak, his voice hoarse, thick with panic. His body trembled violently, as if the terror inside him were too much for his skin to contain. But the forest did not respond. Instead, a rustling sound began to rise from all around him. The trees trembled as something, some unseen force, moved through them. The roots, thick and serpentine, began to writhe, creeping across the forest floor like living things seeking their next victim. They coiled and snaked around his legs, pulling him toward the center of the grove. In his mind, a flash of light, a vision, suddenly overtook him. He saw the Root Witch, a figure of impossibly twisted flesh, her body entwined with the roots of the trees, her hair long and black, flowing like tangled vines in the wind. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to devour the very light around her. She stood at the center of the grove, her form barely human, her skin the color of the earth itself, cracked and covered in moss. And her mouth, oh, her mouth was a yawning void, a pit of darkness that stretched far deeper than any human throat could hold. She beckoned him. Daniel gasped as the vision faded, the world around him snapping back to the present. His body, still bound by the roots, jerked against the earth, his heart pounding in his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became shallow and erratic. The wind howled again, this time louder, carrying with it a voice, 1,000 voices, all whispering the same thing. "Come, come to the roots, become one with the land." His pulse quickened as he realized what it meant, what the Root Witch wanted. She didn't merely kill her victims, number. She trapped them, bound them to the land itself. She transformed them into something else. The roots beneath him grew tighter, curling around his ankles like cold fingers, pulling him deeper into the heart of the grove. He fought, thrashing against the earth, but the grip was inescapable. His mind raced, seeking an answer, a way out. Suddenly, there was a burst of light. His flashlight, which had fallen when he tripped earlier, flickered back to life. For a moment, he was blinded by the harsh beam, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The trees around him were moving. The gnarled roots that had once seemed to be part of the earth were now standing upright, twisting and writhing like serpents. The trunks of the trees creaked and groaned, bending unnaturally. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, as though the entire forest were alive, breathing, shifting around him. And in the distance, standing at the center of the grove, was the figure he had seen in his vision, the Root Witch herself. Her dark eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and the air around her seemed to ripple, as if reality itself bent and twisted in her presence. She was no longer just a figure in his mind. She was real. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice a low growl, echoing through the very trees themselves. "You have come to me, and now you will never leave." Her hands, long twisted branches covered in sharp thorns, reached toward him, the fingers stretching and curling with horrifying grace. He couldn't move, The roots had him locked in place, his body a mere plaything of the forest's will. He screamed, but the sound was lost to the wind, swallowed by the very land that had claimed him. The ground around him began to tremble. The roots, thick and gnarled, moved beneath the earth, pulling at him, dragging him toward the heart of the grove. With every inch that he was pulled deeper into the darkened forest, he felt something terrible, something ancient, gripping at his soul. He was being drawn into the earth. The roots wrapped around him, squeezing tighter, pulling him further into the soil. And as he was dragged downward, his vision blurred, his mind clouded with terror and darkness. The trees around him were no longer trees. They were eyes, eyes that watched, that stared into his very soul. "No, no, please," Daniel screamed, but the words came out as a strangled cry, his body sinking deeper into the earth, swallowed by the roots. And then, just as quickly as the pain had started, it stopped. Daniel's body went still. His eyes, wide and unblinking, stared into the infinite darkness. The forest, the trees, the roots, they all stood silent once more, as though nothing had happened, as though Daniel Carmichael had never existed. Back in Tannenbrook, the sun rose the next morning, casting a faint orange light over the mist-covered hills. The town remained as quiet as it always was, but there was a palpable sense of unease in the air. No one spoke of Daniel, not aloud. The townspeople knew better. Ethan and Sarah waited near the edge of the woods, their eyes trained on the tree line. They had searched for hours the previous night, calling his name, their voices growing hoarse with each passing minute. They found nothing, no sign of him, no sign of any struggle. Just the same eerie silence that seemed to hang over the woods. When the sun rose and they finally gave up their search, the only thing they found near the trees was a small bundle of twine, twisted and knotted like the roots themselves, and a few of Daniel's teeth scattered among the underbrush. And so, the legend lived on. Weeks passed since Daniel's disappearance. The town of Tannenbrook had returned to its usual rhythm, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. The legends, once dismissed as superstitions, now seemed less like stories and more like warnings. And the town's residents, once wary of the Root Witch's Grove, now avoided it entirely, some even crossing themselves when they spoke of it. But for Ethan and Sarah, the pain of Daniel's absence was a wound that refused to heal. They had known him too well to simply let go. The authorities had searched the woods, but they had found no trace of him, no body, no sign of struggle, just the twine and the teeth, each more disturbing than the last. No explanation could explain his sudden disappearance, and the lack of any answers gnawed at them. Still, Ethan and Sarah were determined. They needed closure. They had to know what had happened to their friend, and they were willing to do whatever it took to find out, even if it meant returning to the grove. It was late in the afternoon when Ethan and Sarah stood at the edge of the forest. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the ground, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. There was something about the grove, something about the forest, that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. The woods had an unnatural stillness to them, as though they were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. "I don't think we should be doing this," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound resolute. She knew they had to, but fear clung to her words. We have to, Ethan replied, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the trees. Daniel wouldn't just vanish. There's something in those woods, something we don't understand. We need to find out what happened to him. The wind had picked up again, swirling between the trees, the whispers of the forest growing louder in their ears. It was as though the trees themselves were speaking to them, beckoning them closer, coaxing them into the darkness. Ethan felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "Let's just get this over with," Sarah muttered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She turned to face Ethan, her eyes full of determination. "We'll stick together, okay? We find out what happened to Daniel, and then we leave, no matter what." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he could make such a promise. He had seen the look in the eyes of the people who had lived in Tannenbrook their whole lives, eyes filled with fear, eyes that knew better than to venture too far into the woods. And he had heard the whispers of people who had gone in and never returned. But what choice did they have? They stepped into the forest. At first it seemed like any other hike through the woods, quiet, peaceful, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. But as they pushed deeper into the heart of the forest, something changed. The trees seemed to grow thicker, their trunks more twisted and gnarled, their roots more pronounced, as though they were alive and watching. The air grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the very forest was pressing in on them. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps, and Ethan found himself gripping his flashlight tighter than necessary. They had walked for over an hour, yet the grove, the place where Daniel had disappeared, was nowhere in sight. "I don't like this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the wind. "We've been walking for so long. Why hasn't the grove appeared?" Ethan shook his head, glancing around the darkening woods. He had expected to see the twisted trees by now. But the longer they walked, the more the forest seemed to shift and change around them. The trees bent unnaturally, their limbs stretching out like fingers, reaching toward the pair, pulling the shadows deeper. Suddenly, Ethan froze. He felt it. Something cold, creeping, wrapping around his chest. His heart thudded in his ears and his mouth went dry. There, just ahead, the trees began to open up. The mist swirled and thickened, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The Root Witch's Grove. The circle of gnarled trees stood before them, more menacing than anything they had imagined. The very earth seemed to hum with an eerie energy, the roots of the trees twisting and shifting beneath the surface. A strange, suffocating silence had fallen over the place, as though the entire forest was holding its breath. We found it," Sarah murmured, her voice shaking. Ethan didn't reply. He could only stare at the grove, transfixed by its terrible beauty. The roots seemed to reach out toward him, as though they could sense his presence, pulling at the very soil to draw him in. Something was wrong. The air felt wrong, as if the trees themselves were watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the stillness, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Ethan spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Sarah was gone. "Sarah!" he shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Sarah!" His voice echoed in the silence, but there was no reply. His mind raced. Where had she gone? She couldn't have disappeared so quickly. She had just been standing next to him, hadn't she? A flash of movement caught his eye. There, between the trees, just at the edge of the grove, a figure tall and thin, cloaked in shadow, moved swiftly among the twisted trunks. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Sarah!" He screamed again, but his voice was swallowed by the forest. He ran forward toward the figure, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground, his mind consumed with terror. He had to find her. She couldn't have gone far. But as he stepped closer to the grove, the trees seemed to close in on him, the roots snapping and hissing like snakes in the dark. A low, guttural whisper rose from the earth, a voice that sounded almost like Daniel's. "Ethan," it whispered, "come closer, become one with the land." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. He felt the ground tremble beneath him. The trees around him creaked and groaned as if something, or someone, was moving through them. His flashlight flickered, casting sickly shadows on the ground. There, in the center of the grove, he saw it, a shape rising from the earth, a figure shrouded in darkness, tangled in the roots of the trees. It was Sarah. Her eyes were wide open, but they were not hers anymore. They were dark, hollow pits, the same as the eyes he had seen in his nightmares. Her body was twisted and contorted, her skin pale and cracked, as if it were slowly turning to bark. The roots were coiling around her, pulling her deeper into the earth. "Sarah!" Ethan screamed, but it was too late. The trees shifted, and in one horrible motion Sarah's form was consumed by the earth, disappearing into the dark void of the grove. Her scream echoed through the forest, and then silence. Ethan stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and grief. He had failed. He had come for answers, and instead, he had lost her. But as he stood there, the Root Witch's whisper filled his mind once more. "You are next," it said, a cold, mocking voice that slithered through his thoughts like a poison. The roots beneath him began to stir. They reached out, twisting around his feet, pulling him down, and he realized, too late, that he had made the same fatal mistake as Daniel. The grove was not just a place. It was a trap, and now he was a part of it. Ethan's pulse raced as the roots of the grove tightened around his legs, pulling him deeper into the cursed earth. The trees towered above him like sentinels, their twisted limbs reaching out like jagged fingers, beckoning him toward the dark heart of the forest. His breath came in shallow gasps, his body heavy and immobilized by the unnatural grip of the roots. "Sarah," he whispered, the name like a prayer on his lips, his voice barely audible over the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The wind howled through the branches, but there was no response, only silence, thick and suffocating. The darkness pressed in, a palpable force, as if the grove itself was closing in around him. The air felt damp and fetid, thick with the scent of decay. A soft rustling sound came from somewhere behind him. Ethan turned his head, his eyes desperately searching for any sign of Sarah, but all he saw were the roots moving, twisting, pulling themselves closer. "Don't let it get you," he thought, but his mind was slipping. He could feel it, the pull of the grove, tugging at his very soul. The darkness that surrounded him seemed to whisper, calling him, drawing him into its depths. He shook his head violently, trying to clear his thoughts. He couldn't fall under its spell. Sarah. He gasped again, trying to reach her, to make sense of what had happened. But all that remained was the hollow emptiness, as if the land itself had swallowed her whole. Suddenly the ground beneath him trembled. The roots that had ensnared him tightened, pulling at his clothes, dragging him toward the center of the grove. Ethan struggled against their grip, but it was no use. He was being dragged deeper and deeper into the very earth itself. Then, in a flash of clarity, something from his nightmare reappeared, the figure of the Root Witch. She rose from the ground before him, her silhouette tall and dark, her twisted body a part of the trees that surrounded them. Her hollow eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her gnarled fingers covered in bark and thorns reached out toward him, her voice soft and haunting, curled through his mind like a serpent's hiss. "You are mine now, Ethan," the Root Witch whispered, her voice echoing from all directions. "The land claims all who wander into its embrace. You and your friend, you will be part of the roots, part of the earth, forever." Ethan's heart sank as the vision of Sarah, her broken body now consumed by the earth, flashed before his eyes. The same fate awaited him. He could feel it. The very soil beneath him seemed to pulse with an insidious rhythm, as though the grove itself was breathing, waiting to claim him. His mind screamed for escape, but his body was helpless, paralyzed by the curse that had taken hold of him. The grove had him. There was no turning back. Suddenly the ground cracked open beneath him, and he was swallowed by darkness. When Ethan awoke, he wasn't sure if he had been unconscious for seconds, minutes, or hours. The world around him was cold and damp. His body ached, as though he had been lying on rough stone for an eternity. He tried to move, but his limbs felt stiff, unresponsive, as though they no longer belonged to him. He opened his eyes, and the sight before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. He was no longer on the surface. He was deep underground, surrounded by roots, thick, gnarled roots that twisted and writhed like serpents. They pulsed with a dark, eerie energy, their tendrils creeping up the walls of a vast underground cavern. The roots seemed to be alive, watching him, judging him. And then he saw it. Sarah. Her form was distorted, her body now fused with the earth. She was bent, her body mangled and contorted, her limbs stretched and entwined by the roots. Her eyes were wide open, but they were empty, her pupils replaced by the same hollow darkness that had consumed the Root Witch's gaze. Her mouth was a silent scream, frozen in time. Ethan's heart sank as he realized the truth. Sarah had become part of the grove, just as Daniel had before her. She was now a part of the land, her soul bound to the roots, her body twisted and broken beyond recognition. She was gone, completely gone, her essence absorbed by the curse of the grove. A terrible weight pressed down on Ethan's chest. He could feel it, the pull of the roots tugging at his very soul. The grove wanted him, wanted them all, to become part of it, to join the endless cycle of victims who had come before him. But even as despair threatened to consume him, a spark of defiance ignited in his chest. He refused to let the grove claim him. He wouldn't let it take his soul, his life, and transform him into one of its twisted, hollow husks. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Ethan fought against the roots, his body writhing in pain as they tightened their grip. The roots dug into his skin, their thorns cutting through his flesh, but he didn't stop. He would not be trapped. Not like this. In the distance, he heard the voice again, the Root Witch. "Escape is futile, Ethan," she called from the shadows. Her voice echoed through the cavern, growing louder, more insistent. "You cannot resist the call of the land. You are already part of it. Your soul is mine." But Ethan didn't listen. With every ounce of willpower, he tore himself free from the roots, his body screaming in agony as the thorns scraped and sliced his skin. He couldn't stop now, not when he was so close. He stumbled forward, his vision blurry, his body shaking with exhaustion. The cavern seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the roots surrounding him on all sides, but he kept moving. He had to find a way out. He had to. Suddenly the ground beneath him rumbled. The roots began to shift and the earth cracked open. The walls of the cavern began to tremble, and from the shadows the root witch emerged. Her form was massive now, her body a grotesque fusion of tree, earth, and human flesh. Her face was a twisted mask of rage and sorrow, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. She reached toward him, her hands outstretched, the roots swirling around her like serpents. "Do you think you can escape me?" she hissed, her voice now a deafening roar. "You are mine, Ethan. You and your friends will never leave. The grove claims all who dare trespass into its domain." Ethan stumbled backward, his heart racing. But even as the root witch advanced on him, something within him sparked. He could feel it, the power of the land, the curse that held him in its grasp, but also the small, fragile flame of resistance that had not been snuffed out. There was a way to fight this. He just needed to find it. And then it came to him. Daniel's words, the last thing he had said before disappearing, flashed in his mind. The only way to break the curse is to destroy the heart of the grove. Destroy the root witch herself. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew what he had to do. With every ounce of strength he had left, he turned and ran. Ethan's lungs burned with every desperate breath he took as he ran deeper into the cavern, away from the monstrous figure of the root witch. The ground trembled beneath his feet, the roots of the trees twisting and churning like living creatures, threatening to ensnare him at any moment. But he couldn't stop, not now. The root witch's voice followed him, a terrifying mix of rage and sorrow, echoing off the cavern walls. "You cannot escape me, Ethan. You will be one with the roots, one with the earth." He pushed himself harder, his legs feeling like lead, his body on the brink of collapse. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of the roots writhing around him seemed to grow louder, closer, as though they were pursuing him, pulling him back toward the center of the grove. But through the terror and confusion, a single thought burned in his mind. Destroy the heart of the grove, destroy the root witch. The words felt like a lifeline, pulling him forward. Ethan didn't know how he would do it, but he had to try. He had no other choice. If he didn't, the same fate that had befallen Sarah and Daniel would be his as well. His eyes darted around the cavern, trying to find any sign of what the heart of the grove might be. What did Daniel mean? What was the heart? Was it the twisted roots, the dark energy that seemed to pulse from the very walls of the cavern? Suddenly, a flicker of light caught his attention, a faint glow, far in the distance, emanating from what appeared to be a massive tree at the center of the cavern. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew that tree. It was the source of everything, the center of the grove, the root witch's power. As he sprinted toward it, he could feel the earth beneath him shift. The roots were closing in, pulling at his legs, but he pushed through. He had to reach the tree. He had to reach the heart. The tree loomed ahead, its massive trunk twisting and writhing as if alive, its bark a sickly shade of green, cracked and oozing black sap. At its base was a large gaping hole, and inside, Ethan saw something that made his blood run cold. It was a pulsing, fleshy mass, a beating heart, the size of a large boulder, surrounded by roots that stretched deep into the earth. The heart was the source of the grove's power, the source of the curse that had claimed so many lives. It beat in a rhythm that seemed to echo in his chest, and as it did, he felt his body grow heavier, weaker, as though the very air itself was pressing in on him. The Root Witch was still pursuing him, her voice growing louder as she neared. "You cannot destroy me, Ethan. I am the grove. I am its heart." But Ethan knew what he had to do. He had to destroy it. He had to destroy the heart before it consumed him completely. With a primal scream, he reached into his backpack, his hands trembling with fear and adrenaline. He pulled out the small, rusty axe he had brought along for cutting firewood. It was all he had, all he could use. The roots beneath him recoiled as he raised the axe. With all his might, he swung it toward the pulsing heart at the base of the tree. The axe struck the flesh of the heart with a sickening thud, sending a shock wave of energy through the cavern. The ground beneath him cracked open, and the roots lashed out violently, but Ethan didn't stop. He swung again and again, each strike reverberating through the earth, shaking the cavern to its core. The heart screamed. It wasn't a human scream, but something far older, far more primal, an unnatural guttural sound that echoed through the grove. The roots around him shrieked, snapping and thrashing violently as though they were alive, struggling against the assault. But Ethan's hands were numb, his body drenched in sweat, and he didn't stop. He couldn't. The heart was the key to everything, the source of the curse, the source of the Root Witch's power. If he didn't destroy it, he would become part of the grove, just like Sarah and Daniel. With one final desperate blow, the axe sunk deep into the heart. The scream that followed was deafening. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The roots stopped moving. The cavern fell silent, and then, with a violent explosion of light, the heart burst open. Black blood and thick tar-like sap sprayed out from the wound, splattering across the cavern walls. The air became thick with a putrid stench, and the ground beneath Ethan's feet trembled violently as the roots recoiled in pain. The earth cracked open, the once immovable roots now frantically pulling away from the center of the cavern. The cavern itself began to collapse, the walls shaking as the ancient tree withered and crumbled. The roots writhed like dying creatures, their power draining away, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. Ethan stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground beneath him buckled and cracked, and he had to leap to the side to avoid being swallowed by the chasm that was opening up before him. Through the chaos, he saw the Root Witch. She was no longer the towering, monstrous figure she had been. Now she was withering, her body shrinking, her limbs cracking like dried branches. Her hollow eyes locked onto Ethan's, filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. You destroyed me," she rasped, her voice cracking as she fell to her knees, her form crumbling into dust. "The grove, it was my life." As the last of her form disintegrated, the cavern began to collapse around Ethan. The roots, now nothing more than lifeless tendrils, fell to the ground in a heap, and the air grew lighter, the oppressive weight that had filled the cavern slowly lifting. For a moment, Everything was still. And then, with a final thunderous roar, the cavern exploded into darkness. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He was lying on the forest floor, the cold dirt beneath him, the smell of earth and decay heavy in the air. He blinked, disoriented, his head pounding. The pain in his body felt real, but there was something else, something lighter. He sat up slowly, his heart still racing in his chest. The forest around him was eerily quiet, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. As he stood and looked around, he realized something incredible. The grove was gone. The trees that had once been gnarled and twisted had returned to their natural state. The air felt fresh, the sun shining through the trees as though nothing had ever happened. The root witch, the heart of the grove, the curse, gone. And then, as he walked away from the clearing, the first rays of dawn breaking through the treetops, Ethan realized he was free. He had survived. He had destroyed the heart of the grove, and with it, the curse that had bound so many souls. But deep down, he knew the grove's legend would never truly die. It would remain, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next foolish soul to wander too close. And while Ethan had won this battle, there would always be whispers, stories of the Root Witch's grove, tales of a curse that could never truly be broken. And somewhere, deep in the woods, a voice whispered in the wind, "You will always be part of the land." The trees whispered secrets, their branches brushing together in the light breeze like old bones rattling in their graves. The forest was an ancient thing, and the air around it tasted stale, as though time itself had stopped breathing long ago. Kyle stood at the edge of the trail, squinting up at the canopy above. "This place is something else," he muttered, slinging his backpack higher onto his shoulder. His dark brown hair was damp with sweat, and his hiking boots were coated in fine red dust. Emma rolled her eyes, brushing a clump of pine needles off her leggings. "You mean something else like creepy? Because yes, absolutely. We've been walking for hours and I swear the map is useless." "You're just mad because you dropped your protein bar in the river," said Raj, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He was the planner of the group, always armed with a compass, weather report, and snacks organized by expiry date. "We should be close," said Allie, the quiet one, who rarely spoke unless it mattered. She was a painter, introspective, and emotionally in tune with everything around her. "The lake is supposed to be just beyond that ridge." "Which lake?" asked Sarah. "The cursed one or the one that's just cold and creepy?" Kyle grinned. "They're the same thing." According to the stories Kyle had found online, hidden deep in the Green Hollow forest was an abandoned quarry lake, black as night and supposedly bottomless. Rumor had it that the mine collapsed decades ago, burying workers alive. Some said their spirits never left. Others claimed to hear laughter echoing from the trees, even when alone. The friends had been planning this trip for weeks. No cell service, no parents, no bosses or Wi-Fi. Just 5 20-somethings with camping gear, alcohol, and the kind of confidence only youth could supply. They reached the ridge at dusk. Just as the last rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the lake revealed itself. It was nestled in a rocky bowl, ringed by mossy stone ledges and crooked trees. The water was perfectly still, no ripples, no movement. It was too still, like a photograph instead of a real thing. "Whoa," Kyle whispered. No one said anything. Even Raj stopped crunching his granola bar. The air changed the moment they stepped closer. It was heavier here, charged, like the forest had sucked in a deep breath and was waiting, holding it. They set up camp a little ways back from the water's edge, pitching 2 tents on the flattest patch of earth they could find. Sarah and Emma worked together with practiced ease, while Kyle hammered in stakes like he was racing someone. Allie sat on a nearby log, sketching the lake in her journal, head cocked like she was listening to something no one else could hear. That night, they drank by the fire, laughing, roasting marshmallows, and daring each other to tell scary stories. Kyle, of course, recited the tale of the quarry. "They say the cave-in wasn't an accident," he said, holding a flashlight under his chin for dramatic effect. "The mine owner knew the rock was unstable, but he pushed the workers harder. When it collapsed, he sealed it off. No recovery, no rescue, just left them screaming in the dark." Emma scoffed. "That's corporate America for you. But here's the freaky part," Kyle continued. "Years later, hikers found the place. Said they heard laughter coming from under the water, and when one guy tried diving in, he never came back up. But a few days later, something washed ashore. Just his goggles and a single human tooth lodged in the strap." The group laughed nervously, the fire crackling as if applauding the tale. Then the silence returned, not the usual kind of quiet that falls over forests at night. This was something else. The fire dimmed slightly, the wind stopped, and from the lake, a splash, small, delicate, too delicate to be a fish. The splash was small, like a pebble breaking the surface, but none of them had thrown anything. Everyone froze. Raj turned his head slowly toward the lake. "Did you hear that?" "Probably a frog," Emma said, forcing a shrug, but her voice was thin, strained. Kyle rose from the log and grabbed his flashlight. "Let's check it out." Ali stood too. "No," she said softly. Kyle looked at her. "What?" Ali stared at the lake, her brow furrowed. "Something's wrong. It's too still. Lakes always move, even a little. But that, it's like glass." Emma threw a marshmallow into her mouth and shook her head. "You're all getting spooked because of the story. Kyle made half of that up." "Half?" Kyle said, feigning offense. But Ali didn't laugh. She was still staring, unmoving. Raj stood beside her and aimed his flashlight at the water. The beam cut through the mist just above the lake and landed on the surface. It shimmered but didn't move. "Maybe it was an animal," he said, almost trying to convince himself. "Let's just go to bed," Sarah said, standing and brushing her jeans off. "We hiked all day. We're tired, and weird things always feel weirder at night." "Right," Emma added. "Tomorrow we'll swim and chill. Ghosts don't swim." Still, they went to bed restless, their tents whispering in the breeze that returned sometime around midnight. Somewhere out in the darkness, an owl hooted, a twig snapped, then the forest fell silent again. But the lake never made a sound. The sun rose slow and reluctant, light filtering in hazy shafts through the trees. Morning dew clung to the tents, and the air had the crisp bite of coming fall. Kyle was already awake, crouched near the water, tossing stones across its surface. Allie approached slowly, hair tied up, sketchpad tucked under her arm. "It's still too quiet," she said. Kyle shrugged. "That's why it's perfect. No people, no boats, no screaming kids." He leaned back and smiled. "Just us." Allie hesitated. "You don't hear it?" "Hear what?" She tilted her head slightly. "It's like humming beneath the water." Kyle raised an eyebrow. You're just trying to freak me out. But she didn't laugh. I dreamed about it, she whispered. Something below the lake, eyes like holes, a mouth too wide. It was smiling. Kyle's smirk faded. Later, after breakfast, the group stood at the edge of the lake in swimsuits. The sun was warm now, and the water almost inviting. Almost. Sarah dipped a toe in and shivered. Jesus, it's freezing. It's a quarry lake, Raj said. They don't get sunlight at the bottom. It'll stay cold even in summer. Emma made a face. Well, we didn't hike 2 days to not swim. Let's go. She dove in, and Kyle followed. Then Sarah. Raj eased in carefully, adjusting his glasses. Only Ali stayed on shore, clutching her sketch pad. The lake was deeper than it looked, and the cold was shocking, biting into skin like needles. But it was clear, strangely clear. They could see the smooth stone descending beneath them, fading into shadow. Kyle dove under, holding his breath. He swam deeper, the pressure building in his ears, the water darker with each stroke. Then he saw it, a shelf of rock. Something moved just behind it, white, pale and still. Kyle blinked. It turned, a face. Not a face. Skin like wet porcelain, eyes sunken in black, lips peeled back in a grin that was too wide, too empty. Kyle thrashed upward, lungs burning. He burst through the surface with a scream. Get out! Water splashed as everyone turned to him. What? Emma shouted. Get out of the water! He swam fast toward the shore, clawing his way out. The others followed, confused, cold, scared. Kyle collapsed onto the rocks, panting. I saw something, under the shelf. A face. It smiled at me. Raj tried to reason. It could have been a reflection. It wasn't. It moved. It watched me. Ali, without saying anything, opened her sketch pad and showed them her latest drawing. A pale figure with a grin carved too deep, too wrong. Last night, she whispered, before you swam. The laughter stopped after that. No more jokes. The group stayed closer to shore. The trees pressed in, somehow taller now, more menacing. That night, Emma heard footsteps around her tent. She sat up, heart pounding, and called out, Kyle? No response. Then a whisper, but not from outside, from inside the tent. Something cold brushed her arm. She screamed and dove out, tangled in sleeping bag and mesh. The others came running, flashlights sweeping the trees. No one was in there, Raj said, frowning. I felt it. I heard it, Emma insisted. It whispered my name. What did it say? Ali asked, voice barely above a breath. Emma paused. It said, we remember. The group stood in silence. Even the fire felt colder that night. Ali stared into the trees, and the trees stared back. The next morning, Sarah was gone. Her sleeping bag was empty, her boots still at the tent's entrance. Raj found one of her earrings down by the lake, laid gently on a flat stone. No sign of struggle, no trail, just absence. Panic hit hard. Kyle wanted to search. Emma insisted they pack and leave, but Raj argued they couldn't just vanish into the forest without direction. Let's check the cliffs, Kyle said. She could have gone there to think, or I don't know. But Ali didn't move. She didn't walk away. What? She was taken. The word fell like a stone in the silence. That afternoon they searched the woods. Near the far edge of the lake, Ali found it, a rusted plaque half buried in vines. She brushed it clean. Green Hollow Quarry, Establishment 1886, closed 1902. In memory of the men who perished below, whose smiles remain carved in stone. Kyle stepped back. What the hell does that mean? Emma's eyes were wide. Is that literal? Ali nodded. There are carvings, faces, grins, all around the lake's edge. I saw one this morning. Raj looked sick. This is bad. We need to leave, like now. But as they turned, the path they'd come in on was gone. Trees had shifted, the forest had changed, and the lake was watching. The trees weren't where they had been. Raj checked the compass, spinning it in his hand like it was broken. This makes no sense. The path was here. I marked it. Maybe you're turned around, Kyle said, pacing. I'm not, Raj snapped. The sun rises east, and we came from... Ali pointed. The trees ahead of them had grown together. Branches knotted into one another, forming a wall. Behind them the same. What had once been an open glade was now a cage. Emma took a step back. Is the forest moving? No, whispered Ali. We're moving. Kyle frowned. What the hell does that mean? We're not in the forest anymore, she said, her voice quiet. Not really. It feels like the forest, but it's changed. We've crossed over. Raj scoffed. Crossed into what? Ali turned toward the lake. Kyle followed her gaze and froze. There were grins carved into the stone by the waterline, dozens, some fresh, some old, some shallow scratches, others deep and jagged, twisted with strange symbols beneath them, all smiling. Jesus, Emma whispered. Were those here yesterday? No, said Kyle. No way. Ali knelt near one of the carvings, brushing moss aside. Her fingers hovered over a deep, toothy grin. They weren't carved by people. How do you know? Raj asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked up, eyes distant. Because I dreamt of them before we came. The smiles, the whispers. They were calling for someone to find them. That night, they didn't light a fire. They huddled in one tent. No one wanted to be alone. Every crack of twigs, every shuffle of leaves outside made them jump. Then it started again. The humming, low, subtle, just beneath hearing. A vibration in the teeth. Ali's eyes flew open. It's here. Kyle sat up. What is? Before she could answer, the humming rose into something worse. Laughter, distant, echoing. It came from the lake. Then, a scream. Emma. They rushed out. Her sleeping bag was ripped open. The tent slashed. She was gone. Raj shouted her name, but it was swallowed by the dark. The forest didn't respond. They found a trail of wet footprints leading toward the water. Only they weren't barefoot. They were wrong, elongated, crooked, grinning. We're being hunted, Kyle said. Whatever this thing is, it's taking us one by one. Ali was pale. It doesn't kill. What? It doesn't kill. It absorbs. Raj stepped back. You're not making sense. She looked up, her voice hollow. When it touches you, it doesn't just take your body. It takes your memory, your voice, your smile. You become part of it. You become the next face in the stone. They were silent for a long time. Then Raj spoke. How do you know all this? Ali's eyes filled with tears. Because I saw it. In a dream. No, not a dream. A memory. One that wasn't mine. One that belonged to someone it already took. Kyle's stomach turned. This is insane. But what if it's not? Raj asked, voice trembling. The next morning, Kyle made a decision. I'm diving again. Ali stared at him. What? I saw something under the ledge. That's where it lives. That's where it watches. If I can find it, maybe I can end this. Maybe there's something down there that will stop it. Raj grabbed his arm. You're going to get yourself killed. I'm already dead if I do nothing. They returned to the lake. It was even darker than before. The sun barely touched it now, like the light refused to go near. Kyle zipped up his wetsuit, took a flashlight, and waded in. Ali stood at the edge. Don't go near the faces. He paused. Why? They whisper. If you listen, they get in. Kyle nodded and dove under. The water was freezing. Every inch deeper felt like diving into liquid ice, but he kept going, flashlight cutting through the murk. The ledge loomed. He swam toward it. Then he saw them, bodies, dozens, floating just beneath the stone shelf, suspended in the water like marionettes. Their mouths locked in wide, unnatural grins. Some were old, skeletal, others recent, too recent. He recognized Emma's eyes, still open, still screaming. He kicked backward, heart slamming. Then, the flashlight flickered, and in that last flicker, it appeared, the grinning man, no longer just a face. Pale skin stretched thin over a long, distorted frame, arms like spider legs, fingers too many, eyes black, lidless, and that smile, impossibly wide, rows of teeth sharp and too long, it surged toward him. Kyle screamed. Bubbles exploded from his mouth as he shot upward. Kyle lay on the cold ground, coughing up water. His flashlight, cracked and useless, lay a few feet away. Ali was by his side, pressing a trembling hand to his back. I saw them, Kyle gasped. They're all down there. Emma, Sarah, others, so many others. Raj knelt beside him, face pale. What do you mean, others? Miners, Kyle choked out. Workers, children. I saw bones in the rocks, grinning skulls embedded in the ledge, like they were absorbed, sealed. He turned to Ali, desperation in his eyes. What the hell is this thing? Ali didn't answer right away. She looked toward the lake, where the mist had begun creeping back. It slithered over the surface like a living thing, curling in tendrils, seeking. It's older than the quarry, she said finally. Older than the mine. Maybe older than the forest. It feeds on presence, awareness. And once you see it, once you feel it, it marks you. Raj stood. Then we don't look. We don't think about it. We walk until we're out of here. Kyle shook his head. There's no way out. Raj's voice cracked. There has to be. Ali rose, her sketch pad in hand. She flipped it open to a new drawing, one she hadn't consciously made. It showed their campsite, the lake, and 5 figures. 4 were grinning. 1, Raj, was fading. Raj backed away. No, that's not real. Ali's voice was a whisper. It's already in your head. They began hearing voices that night. Not whispers, full voices, familiar ones. Emma laughing just out of sight. Sarah calling Kyle's name. The voices led nowhere, always just out of reach. But they sounded so real, so full of warmth, that each time one of them almost ran toward it. Almost. Ali warned them. If you follow, it takes more than your body. It takes you, your memories, who you were. I don't want to die like that, Raj said, barely audible. It's worse than death, Ali said. You become part of the song, the chorus of grins. That night, Kyle had a dream. He stood in a tunnel, low ceiling, jagged rock, the creak of wood beams overhead. It was the mine, but it was alive, breathing. The walls pulsed. Ahead of him stood men in mining gear, early 1900s, pickaxes in hand, covered in dust, all smiling. One turned toward him. His face was half gone, skin peeled back to bone. I swung first, the man said. The others followed. We buried it deep. But stone don't hold long, and water remembers. Kyle woke screaming. The next day, Raj forgot his own name. They were sitting by the fire pit, eating the last of their granola bars, when he went quiet. Hey, Raj, Kyle said. You okay? Raj looked up slowly. Who's Raj? They froze. It's okay, Ali said gently. You're tired, just say your name. But Raj only blinked. I don't remember. Ali grabbed her sketch pad and opened to a blank page. The drawing was already there. Raj's face, smiling and empty. He was gone by morning. No scream, no struggle. Just his glasses left on a tree stump and a faint hum in the trees. Now it was just Kyle and Ali. Kyle was unraveling. He'd taken to muttering to himself. At night he paced the edge of the lake, whispering back to the voices. Ali didn't sleep. She drew, page after page. The grinning man appeared on each one, growing larger, more defined. She realized something. He's not bound to the lake anymore. Kyle looked up. What? He's fed too much. He's full. And now he's leaking out. Into the woods. Into us. Every thought of him. Every drawing, every whisper. It strengthens him. Kyle stepped away. Then we have to stop thinking. Stop listening. It's too late for that. Ali showed him the final drawing. It was a door. Beneath the lake. Open. And behind it, a mouth, grinning wide, stretching across the page, waiting. There was only one thing left to do. End it. Kyle and Ali stood at the edge of the lake one final time. Dawn crept slowly through the trees, casting a faint gold light on the dark water. The mist had pulled back. The surface looked calm, but below. Ali tied her sketch pad in a waterproof bag. If I don't come back, she said, burn it. Don't let anyone else see these. Kyle didn't argue. They dove together. The cold was worse now, biting, unbearable. The descent took forever. And then, just as Kyle's lungs screamed for air, he saw it again. The door, cut into the rock, perfectly square, like it had always been there. Ali reached for it. The stone around it pulsed like skin. As she touched the door, her body jolted, and the water boiled with sound. Laughter, voices, thousands of them. Kyle screamed but heard nothing. Then the door opened, and the world shattered. The door opened. It wasn't a door at all. It was skin. The moment Ali's hand made contact, the water trembled. The surface rippled, distorting, warping. What was once solid stone turned liquid, and with it came an immense pull, dragging them both deeper, farther into the abyss. The laughter was deafening now. Every laugh, every whisper seemed to carry 1,000 voices, all layered upon one another, all speaking. Some in languages Kyle didn't understand, some in voices he recognized, and some in his own voice. Ali clawed at the water, her body jerking violently as though something was holding her. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Kyle, we have to stop it. But Kyle was frozen. His hands grasped at the walls of water, his head spinning with impossible sounds. He saw them, faces, dozens of faces floating, screaming. They were alive but not. Their eyes were wide, black, and staring at him, their mouths stretched into grins, their lips pulled back into grotesque, silent mockeries of laughter. He could see their faces clearly, Emma's wide eyes, Raj's crooked smile, Sarah's frozen expression. They were all there, stuck in the water, trapped, and worse, grinning. He turned to Ali. What is this? Her voice cracked as she gasped for air. It's feeding. It feeds on us, our fear, our memories, everything we are. It turns into a part of it. The world around them began to distort. The water bubbled up in unnatural spirals. The lake itself felt alive, breathing beneath them. The faces continued to swirl around them, growing closer, pressing in. Then came the whisper, faint at first, but growing louder. I remember. The words vibrated in their chests, as if the voice had come from within them. Ali's eyes widened with horror. That's... she gasped. The whisper continued, growing stronger with each passing moment. A voice, more like an echo than sound. I remember. Kyle's heart thundered in his chest. The voices were impossible. The faces were impossible. The water was impossible. Nothing made sense, and yet everything felt real. Then, like a slap to the face, a memory rushed into Kyle's mind, unbidden, overwhelming. He was standing in the quarry. No, he wasn't. But he was there. It felt like he had always been there. His hands were covered in dirt, his skin pale, eyes sunken. He felt dead. His breath labored as though he had just come from a long journey. A man stood before him, grinning wide, a miner covered in grime. His eyes were dead black pits. "We're all part of it." The miner's voice echoed in Kyle's head. Kyle recoiled. This wasn't a memory, it was a vision. The man stepped forward, dragging something behind him, a massive chain wet with blood. "You came for it." Kyle tried to speak, but his mouth felt full of water. His chest burned. The miner's grin widened. He stepped aside to reveal something buried beneath the stone, something huge. The thing was long, black, and formless. At first it seemed like a stone, but then it shifted. Its surface rippled. It was a mass of eyes, of mouths, a writhing mass of grinning faces, hundreds of them, all speaking, all laughing. "It's the lake itself," the miner said, his voice gurgling like it was coming from the water. "You didn't come here for just water. You came for something more." Kyle's eyes widened. "It's alive." The miner's laughter was the last thing Kyle heard before the vision vanished and reality shifted again. Ali pulled Kyle back to reality, or at least what passed for reality now. "Kyle!" she shouted, shaking him. "Snap out of it!" He blinked, gasping, his fingers grasping her arm. "It's not just the lake," he whispered, voice trembling. "The whole quarry, it's alive. They buried it here. The miners, they buried the thing inside." Ali's eyes went wide with realization. That's why they sealed it. That's why they abandoned the quarry. They didn't just bury people. They buried it. Kyle's mind raced, thoughts fragmenting like shattered glass. The lake, the entity, it's been feeding ever since. It's been feeding on anyone who finds it. The water bubbled again, more violently now, as if it heard them. Something dark rose from the depths, a shape. At first it seemed like a figure, but as it emerged it became clear. It was an amorphous thing, not human at all, but some blend of rock, water, and flesh. An endless mass of grinning faces, each more grotesque than the last. Eyes turned to look at them, black pits that seemed to stare into their very souls. Each one smiled. Kyle stumbled backward, heart hammering. Ali grabbed his arm. "It's hunting us." Then, suddenly, everything went black. When Kyle woke, he was no longer in the water. He lay on stone, rough-hewn and cold. The quarry walls surrounded him, but they were different now. They felt alive. Ali was beside him, her chest rising and falling, but her face was pale, almost lifeless. "Kyle," she whispered, eyes flicking open, full of terror. "What happened?" Kyle asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around, at the stone, at the grinning faces embedded in the walls, and then down. Her fingers trembled as she touched her chest. A grin, not her own, a mark, carved deep into her skin. She gasped, pulling her hand away as if burned. "It didn't take us fully, it marked us." Kyle's mind reeled. The bargain. This was it. The truth was more terrifying than anything they had imagined. It had marked them to become part of the quarry, to become part of the entity. And they weren't the first. The grinning faces were everywhere, in the stone walls, in the water, in the air. The entity had taken on an entirely new form. It no longer had a shape or an outline. It was everything and nothing, an entity of smiles and black eyes that seeped into the very fabric of the quarry itself. The water pulsed like it had a heartbeat, vibrating with each movement, every breath. Kyle's chest felt tight, suffocating. He looked over at Ollie. Her eyes were wild, filled with an eerie recognition. "They're still here, all of them," she whispered. "In the rock, in the water." Kyle tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The grin on his face, one that had been carved into his skin, itched and burned like fire. His hand shot to his chest, but the mark didn't go away. It didn't fade. It was part of him now. Allie's eyes darted around the quarry as she stood up. "It wants us. It wants all of us." Kyle tried to focus, pushing the panic out of his mind. "We can't stay here. It's just waiting. It knows we're here. It's not just waiting. It's feeding, and we are the harvest," Allie said. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking. "It's waited so long, Kyle. So long. This place, this quarry, it's where it was born. But it can't leave. It's tied to the land, to the water. It can only grow here, feeding off the memories of those who come." The ground beneath them trembled. "Then we destroy it," Kyle said, suddenly certain. The weight of his words felt like a release, as if the decision had been made for him. They were trapped, but there had to be a way out. They couldn't just let it win. They couldn't let it keep feeding on anyone else who stumbled across this place. Ali's gaze hardened. "We destroy it, but how?" Kyle glanced back toward the lake. It was no longer still. The water roiled, black and thick. There was a strange pulse, a rhythm that echoed in his skull, as if something alive was moving beneath the surface, something hungry. The truth finally settled on him like a weight. The entity beneath the lake wasn't just a thing. It was the land itself. The forest, the quarry, the lake. All of it was one massive interconnected organism, feeding and growing, bleeding into each other. Its influence reached far beyond just this place. It was ancient, and it would not stop until every living thing in its vicinity was consumed. Ali caught his eye. She knew. They both knew. It had to be done. There was no turning back now. Ali started pacing, her mind racing. "We need to find the source, the heart of it, the thing that controls the whole network. If we can destroy that, if we can sever the connection, maybe it'll die." Kyle's gaze fixed on the lake. The water shifted, and then the whispering voices began again, soft at first, then louder, closer. The faces, still grinning, rose from the depths, but now there were more than before. Each face was distinct. Each face was familiar. People they had seen. People who had been lost. People whose memories had become part of the thing. But now, they had their own voices. Kyle's mind raced. The memories, it's using them to stay alive, to grow. It feeds on us, but it doesn't just consume our bodies. It consumes our identities. The grins, those aren't just markings, they're us. We are becoming part of it. Ali froze, her breath catching. "You think the quarry itself is a prison?" "It's a trap, Ali." Kyle clenched his fists. "And we're the bait." The ground beneath them shook harder, sending rocks tumbling into the lake. The entity beneath the water responded, its laughter growing more insistent, louder, more ravenous. "We can't keep running," Kyle said, his voice filled with resolve. "We have to find the heart, the place where this all began." Ali nodded grimly. "I know where it is." Kyle turned to her, his heart pounding. "Where?" She pointed, her finger trembling. In the mine. Kyle stared at her. The mine. But it was sealed off. It was buried in the collapse. Allie swallowed hard. The collapse didn't just bury the miners. It sealed the heart. The entity, whatever it is, it was trapped in there. And when the mine collapsed, it wasn't just a cave-in. The entity was bound. But it can't stay bound forever. The water, it leaks into the forest, into the quarry, into everything. And now it's ready to escape. The realization hit Kyle like a punch to the gut. It never left. It was never trapped. It was just waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for us, Allie added softly. With no more words left to say, they moved forward. The mine's entrance loomed ahead, jagged and dark. The air grew heavier, the oppressive sense of being watched almost unbearable. The walls were covered with strange carvings, symbols etched into the stone, crude like the grins. Kyle and Ali made their way deeper into the mine, the path winding and narrow. Every step felt heavier, as if the very earth was pulling them down into it. And then they reached the center. The ground sloped downward sharply, and there, in the heart of the mine, lay the source. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a creature. It was all of it. The mine, the lake, the forest. It was part of an ancient network, a system, a living organism, a massive entity, fed by the memories, the souls, the fear of anyone who entered its grasp. The heart was not a beating thing, but a center, an epicenter, where everything converged. The ground pulsed beneath their feet. The walls seemed to move, bending in strange patterns. And in the center, a grinning face was carved deep into the rock. It was watching them. It was waiting. The ground cracked open as the entity began to surface, and with it, the faces began to emerge from the stone, from the water, from the shadows, all of them. Kyle's heart raced as he realized the truth. They had never left. They were already part of it. He turned to Allie, her eyes wide with fear. We end this now, or we're part of it forever. She nodded. We destroy it. With no more hesitation, Kyle grabbed a loose pickaxe from the wall and raised it high. He slammed it into the center of the grinning face. The ground shuddered. A piercing scream filled the air, and the water began to boil. Kyle's body felt like it was being torn apart. The face screamed, and the laughter drowned out all sound. And then, the silence. The pickaxe hit the stone with a sickening crunch, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The quarry, the lake, the water, everything stood still. The grinning face carved into the stone trembled, and a low, hollow thrum filled the air. And then the ground shook. It started as a vibration, small at first, like a distant earthquake. But it grew quickly, spreading through the earth, up the walls, into the very bones of the forest. The air grew thick with a heavy, suffocating weight, and Kyle could feel it everywhere. In the ground, in the water, in the very air they breathed. The faces, those grinning, hollow-eyed faces, began to twist. The stone, the water, the forest, all of it moved. Something was happening, something far worse than they'd ever imagined. It's not dead. Ali's voice trembled, her eyes wide with terror. It's never been dead. Kyle backed away slowly, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The walls cracked open. The faces seemed to pull themselves free from the stone, emerging like tortured souls from their prison. They twisted in agony, but their grins never faded. They were part of it, just as Kyle and Ale were now. They had made a mistake. The quarry wasn't the source of the entity. It wasn't just the lake or the water or the mine. The entity was the quarry, the forest, the earth itself. A hunger that had existed long before humans had set foot here, and they had woken it. The walls of the quarry trembled as the dark mass began to emerge. It was massive, more than just a thing. It was a force, a living entity that bled into everything. The air itself seemed to warp as the smiles spread, manifesting on the rocks, the trees, the lake itself. Ali was already moving, pushing Kyle away. "We can't fight it. It's too strong. It feeds on us, on fear, on memories. The only way to stop it, to kill it, we have to stop it from existing." The faces all around them stared at her. Their black, soulless eyes reflected a terrible truth. "We are part of it now, Ali," Kyle said, voice breaking. "It knows our names, our memories. We're trapped." Ali's eyes locked onto the stone, onto the grinning faces. Her hand trembled as she reached for her sketchpad. I have one more drawing," she whispered. The entity roared, its sound unearthly. It was 1,000 voices, all laughing, all screaming. It echoed in their bones, in their blood. It was the quarry. It was everything. "I have to do this," Ali whispered again, as if convincing herself. She opened the sketchpad. The pages were blank, except for one. The figure that had been sketched in the center of the page was not the grinning face. It wasn't the quarry or the lake. This was something else, something ancient. The figure was the heart of the entity, the source. Ali's breath caught in her throat as her fingers hovered over the page. She hesitated. She could feel the entity trying to reach her, trying to pull her thoughts into the void. The water sloshed around them, and the faces in the stone were no longer still. They were alive. The walls began to crack open wider, like jaws, like an animal that had been asleep for centuries and was finally waking. But Ali knew what she had to do. She couldn't think about the consequences. The entity would not let them escape. With a steady hand she drew. As her pencil moved, the stone walls seemed to react. The water churned, the earth rumbled, but Ali pressed on. Each line, each curve brought her closer to what she needed to draw. The shape emerged, a dark, twisted being, its form writhing in black ink, an endless series of eyes and smiles overlapping in an impossible pattern. The creature was vast, ancient, and it was hungry. Kyle looked down at the sketch, then back at the grinning faces in the walls. "You're making it worse. It'll—" "No," Ali said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not just drawing it. I'm drawing its end, the thing that holds it, the chain that binds it." She continued to draw, every motion taking a physical toll on her, her mind slipping further into the entity's grasp. The grin on her own face, the one carved into her chest, felt like it was laughing too, a part of it. But just as she finished the final stroke of the drawing, an X, a simple mark, the air went still. The quarry went silent. The faces in the stone froze, their mouths no longer grinning, their eyes no longer following their every movement. The air thickened with the stench of decay, of earth, of something ancient. And then it happened. The light shifted. The walls trembled again, but this time they receded. The faces faded. The water, black and roiling just moments ago, stilled. The earth seemed to breathe. And then the entity, its massive, impossible form, collapsed. The rock walls crumbled. The lake froze in place, and the once malevolent mass of darkness fell to the earth like a heap of rotting leaves, scattering, disintegrating into dust. For the first time since they'd arrived, The forest grew still. The weight pressing down on them began to lift, and the air felt lighter. The earth no longer throbbed with hunger. Ali collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The sketch pad fell from her hands, the last drawing of the entity's end still faintly visible on the page. Kyle dropped to her side, pulling her away from the wreckage. "It's over," he whispered. Ali nodded weakly, her body shaking, her mind still reeling from the encounter. But at what cost? The quarry was silent. The faces, once embedded in the rock, were gone. The water no longer churned with the whispers of the lost, but the marks on their bodies, Kyle's, Ali's, they remained, as if the quarry had left its final trace. The land, the lake, the forest, they would never forget. As they walked back through the forest, the sun rising over the horizon, the forest was quiet. The trees, the earth, everything was still. But Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Ali turned to him, her face weary but determined. "We're free, Kyle, but we can never forget. Not truly." Kyle looked back one last time at the quarry, the lake, the place that had almost consumed them both. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. A smile without a grin. The last smile.